Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. And today's opinions will be about Lockwood Company, The Screaming Staircase by Jonathan Stroud. So, Lockwood Company is set in England, an England that is vaguely modern, but with a problem. Ghosts have not just been confirmed to exist, but are now everywhere. And these ghosts are not the harmless spooks of yesteryear. These ghosts can kill with a touch, drive you to madness, and freeze you in your tracks with their evil aura. Luckily, they can be fought. Ghosts can be fended off with salt, iron, and light. They can be destroyed if their source, the object that ties them to this world, is destroyed. The difficulty is the only people who can actually see and hear them with any kind of solidity are children. Most kids have some ability to sense ghosts, though they lose it as they reach adulthood. Some kids have a lot stronger talent, and they work as agents. The professionals who research ghosts, track down the sources, and make haunted places safe. Most agencies have adult supervisors, but Lockwood Company is different. It's the only company that is run entirely by the agents, specifically 3 of them. Anthony Lockwood, the leader, George Cubbins, who is usually in charge of research, and their newest assistant, Lucy Carlisle, our POV character. Only a couple of months after Lucy is hired, they run into trouble on a job and end up owing a client far more money than they have. Meanwhile, Lucy finds herself obsessed with a ghost of a murdered girl, and the agency gets an offer that seems both too good to be true and far too dangerous. The 3 of them are hired by one of England's wealthiest men to investigate one of the country's most haunted manors. If they can survive, they will save their company. But their survival is in no way near guaranteed. Okay, so you might remember that I had very mixed feelings on the Bartimaeus series, Jonathan Stroud's previous series. I liked his writing, I liked the concept, I loved how complex his world building was, I loved the weird-ass sense of timelessness / out-of-timeness that it had, but I absolutely hated the main character. I was really hoping that this series would keep all the stuff I loved and just not have Nathaniel. And I would say it did. The characters in this book are so much more likable. Each is balanced mix of wanting to do the right thing, being slightly selfish, thinking they know everything that is right, and accepting when they make mistakes. They feel like real people, but also real people that I'm happy to spend a few hundred pages with. Because, yeah, Nathaniel felt real, I just didn't want to spend any time with him. And I feel like maybe, just maybe, Stroud heard someone's commentary about how unlikable his previous protagonist was, because he does mention in text repeatedly how likable Lockwood is. Luckily, Lockwood is not our POV character, so the repeated mention that he is an incredibly likable character does not feel really arrogant. Instead, the repeated reference to his irresistible smile, his brilliant energy, and his charismatic pauses seem like more just Lucy has a crush on him. Though I was happy to say that this was also not the kind of crushes that you see in a lot of YA fantasy, with endless sexual tension and heavy focus on how hot the love interests are. Lucy does notice the physical things about Lockwood. She noticed he's tall, slender, has great teeth, but most of her focus is on how these traits are showing his personality. She focuses on his smile a lot, and she focuses on how he uses that smile to manipulate people. She focuses on his height, but it's far more about his stance, how he moves, and how he dresses. There is just a much higher focus on who her crush is, rather than how he looks. It's not rubbed in your face. Stroud never directly says anything about this crush being far more about personality than the physical, but it just feels more authentic to the way young teenagers interact with each other. I really liked it. I also love the fact that it's subtle enough that if the reader doesn't have an interest in romantic drama, it doesn't have to be interpreted that way. Especially in this one, though my sister has mentioned it gets a bit more obvious in the later ones, but in this one, it does feel a little bit like, does she have a crush on him, or does she just admire him a lot? Does she want to be friends with him? We're not sure. And that feels really right for young teenagers. Which does bring me to my next point. I spent a lot of this book really curious about exactly how old these kids are. It's mentioned that Lucy thinks an 18-year-old looks a couple of years older than her, and the 12-year-old looks a couple of years younger than her. So I'm guessing they are somewhere between like 13 and 17, which is an age I buy them being able to run this business on their own. Some mature kids could pull this off, but would make the kind of mistakes that we see these characters making. It's a great age for thinking that you can run things better than adults, while also having no idea what you're actually doing. And this is shown physically in the office/home space, because it's all relatively organized, well put together, except for the kitchen, which is a hot mess at all times. And I felt like that was a great way to physicalize the kids' ability to do something great, while also completely lacking the understanding of how to run the basics of your life. Now, this is going to be a side tangent on a side tangent, but one of the things that bothered me, but I don't think will bother the target audience of this book, is as an adult, I had a hard time not agreeing with the detective who clearly thought it was absurd that these teenagers are out here doing this very dangerous job on their own. As an adult, I even questioned that anyone in a vaguely modern world would send children out to face death just because they are the only ones who can physically see the danger. And I think that this is the beginning of a deeper theme. Like, it's not developed much in this book, but I get the vibes that later books are going to heavily touch on society's willingness to sacrifice the weaker, less powerful members of a group for the greater good. One of the many things that kept me reading the Bartimaeus series long past the point that Nathaniel had annoyed me past all redemption was the fact that he was doing some really interesting social commentary in the world building. And I love that. And I suspect that that's where this series will go as well, but it's kept very light in this first book. But I do want to jump back to the characters for a second. I really feel like Stroud captured the early teenage years with these kids. They sound like kids, they act like kids, they fight like kids. And I sort of love the fact that Lucy and George dislike each other on sight. It feels very authentic, with just enough actual conflict to make their petty arguments feel like when you meet two kids who you know good and damn well are going to be friends later, but for now they just hate each other for no real reason. And I love the fact that Lockwood is set up as this sort of like swashbuckling Sherlock kind of character. He's figuring things out, but not telling anyone what's going on. He's wearing this long, dramatic coat. He has a mysterious past, seems to know everyone, is vaguely upper class, is good with a sword, but still has enough awkward teenageness to make him feel more fun and relatable. It's not too heavy-handed, just enough to give us that random Victorian vibes. Because yes, this is another Stroud book that I feel like I really would have guessed it to have been set in the Victorian era if I was not reading carefully. Like, yeah, there are cars, the characters are clearly dressed in modern clothing, but with all the ghosts, the rapiers, the fancy old manor houses, the creepy detective versus the hero detective, the importance of street lamps, the over-exaggerated physiques, it just feels Victorian. And some of those vibes do lend to a certain feeling of being a bit dated a couple of times. Like Lockwood's house, which is also the agency's headquarters, is full of these antique artifacts from all around the world, and some of the descriptions have heavy colonizer vibes. Like, they refer to them as oriental and tribal artifacts. They are treated as clearly superstitious things that wouldn't actually work. Though I will say Lockwood says a few things to indicate that at least he is willing to take their efficacy more seriously. And there are moments that we are supposed to find these objects as inherently silly. And it feels very much like the way Victorian English people treated objects from any culture but their own. Also, some of the physical descriptions of the characters, you can just tell it was published a decade ago. I feel like a current editor would have said, "Hey, Jonathan, you're focusing a bit too much on George's appearance." It never got to the point that I was feeling uncomfortable, like it never got too much for me, but do be aware that Lucy comments on how chubby George is and how unattractive she finds his body a lot. I'm really hoping for less of this in the next book, but mostly I like the random Victorian vibes. It makes the book feel more timeless rather than dated, usually. I also do want to mention the structure of this book, because I feel like it is vaguely related to the Victorian vibes. So, like, if you've ever actually read Sherlock Holmes stories, you know that they are often structured as beginning at the end of one case, then flowing into another case that seems completely unrelated, but might not be. This book follows that structure. But because it's fantasy, we have world building to do. And most of that world building gets done in the chapters between the two cases, which makes the two cases seem even further apart, which makes the book feel honestly pretty disjointed in the middle, but it does come together in the end. So if you get to the middle and you feel like you're reading just a series of random events, keep going. It will make sense in the end. I also want to say that I feel like this book has the exact right amount of questions left over at the end to make me want to read the rest of the series, while also giving it a solid feeling conclusion. Now, the conclusion did happen pretty quickly, but the book had been building the bits that would all connect together throughout the entire thing, and so it slots in nicely. It feels a bit like when you're doing a jigsaw puzzle and you have those last three pieces, and those last three pieces just go in so simple. The world Jonathan Stroud created is really interesting, and I want to know more about it, but I feel like I got enough through the story that I'm not left annoyed by unanswered questions. The writing was simple, clear, and with just enough of a voice to help us get to know Lucy. The pacing is nice, quick, and fun. It's got the feelings of like an adventure novel. This one feels very solidly middle grade to me, but older middle grade. The writing is appropriate for like 4th grade up-ish. The way the crush is handled feels really right for late elementary, early middle school kids. There's a good bit of violence, though I think it does a great job of keeping all the really dark shit off page. Like, there's this repeated joke that they make where Lockwood keeps starting to talk about this horrific serial killer that he helped capture, and he keeps just starting to talk about what the killer did, but then gets cut off by the others who already know the details and are not interested. But this book is one where someone does die on page. Our heroes are always intensely aware that they are risking their lives, and it's mentioned that kids die on a regular basis doing this job. It's the kind of violence I think works really well for the middle grade age range. Honest, scary, but separated from reality enough to keep it from being traumatizing. Overall, I really liked this one, and I'm super excited to read more. It gave me exactly what I wanted with all the things I liked about Bartimaeus, but with far more likable protagonists. I haven't seen the Netflix show yet, and I don't want to see it before I finish reading the series, because I have been burned before with adaptations that I thought were just covering the first book, and then it turned out to be the entire damn series. Overall, if I weren't hella broke, I would be buying the next one immediately. It stands to be a great series.